The Cardinals are coming off of a big win on Monday Night Football and now head east to play the Miami Dolphins and potentially quarterback Tua Tagovailoa. We're exploring this matchup on Crossover Thursday with Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Cardinals.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Network. I am Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins, joined by Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals. We have an inter-conference matchup between the Cardinals and the Dolphins, 1 o'clock kickoff, and we have you covered for every storyline of this rarity game once every 4 years or so. Now that there's a 17th game, maybe we'll get it a little more frequently. But before we get into it, today's Crossover Thursday episode is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Alex, it's good to see you. You and I believe, did this my first year doing Locked On Dolphins in 2020. And it's been a while. So how are things going?
Yeah, likewise, dude. It's one of those things where these teams just never play. Like the Cardinals seem to play the Lions every year. I know the Dolphins have teams that they play every year that are out of division and out of the sister divisions they play. But yeah, this should be a fun one in South Beach for sure.
So we have Arizona coming to town off of the win over the Chargers. And they're a team that I know is a little bit banged up. You know, the loss of Dennis Gardeck feels like a big one for Arizona. Is it health? Is it Marvin Harrison Jr.? Is it Kyler Murray's play? Like, what's the big story for you as we get near this midseason point with the Cardinals coming off of a win against the Chargers?
So it's twofold. One of the things that I say on my show a lot is the only thing worse than having a problem is not knowing what the root of the problem is. And that's kind of something we've been dealing with here in the Valley. Looking at the Cardinals, especially with the offense. The defense is depleted of talent. This is the 2025, focal point will be the defense with infusion through free agency and then the draft again. The offense is supposed to be leading the charge, and they take quarters off. They take multiple series off. So the big story here is, what the hell do they need to do to figure this out? And what we saw against the Chargers was run the ball. Give the ball to James Conner. James Conner is the most important offensive skill position player not named Kyler Murray to make this offense tick. And the second fold is Marvin Harrison Jr. He came into a situation where it's a run-first offense. You have a top 12 running back and a top 6 tight end in Trey McBride. It's good that he's not drafted to save the offense. And I think people are witnessing the growing pains that maybe they're a little bit upset that they're not seeing, 4 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns like he displayed against the Rams a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, so for Arizona, you mentioned the defensive side of the football, and I know they used a first-round pick in Darius Robinson, who's been banged up. We mentioned Dennis Gardeck already. For Dolphins fans coming into this game, and potentially Tua, a lot of Dolphins fans will say, you're going to hold your breath every time he's back there. You don't want him to take hits. Right. What do you expect the pressure opportunities are going to look like in this game for Arizona with a first-round pick and then a guy who's been a really sneakily productive player in Gardeck? Like, I was really bummed when the news came out that he's down for an ACL.
Yeah, I mean, the Cardinals had a lesser-than roster talent-wise on the defensive side of the ball before the season started. Then they lose B.J. Ojulari, their second-round pick from 2 years ago at LSU, who was supposed to be the lead pass rusher to an ACL in camp. Darius Robinson, 27th overall pick, had an injury, was put on IR. The practice window is open, but is closing very quickly. So we'll see if he plays this Sunday or if he's going to end up making his NFL debut next week. And then Dennis Gardeck, the situational pass rusher, was turned into an every down outside linebacker for this team. To answer your question directly, I called them like stick figures last week against Justin Herbert. Like, either there are 3 guys behind the line of scrimmage or tea parties in the backfield. So Tua could very well pick apart this young secondary with a defense devoid of the pass rush for the majority of defensive snaps that we've seen over the course of the season for the Cardinals. I will say that Nick Rallis has really coached this team up. They're playing out of their shoes compared to the talent level that they have, namely Garrett Williams, who looks to be the CB1 of the future, Max Melton, rookie out of Rutgers. They've done a pretty good job as young corners covering with, no pass rush.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that, as we've been over at Locked On Dolphins, kind of exploring from a team building perspective the different chapters that each team is in, and cross-referencing versus Miami and where they're at in their life cycle. Arizona's come up a few times with what Monty Ossenfort has done with all of the draft capital and picking by draft volume, but acknowledging that it was probably going to be a few years of kind of recalibrating the roster. Who are some of the other young hits for Arizona since this Ossenfort regime has been brought in? And then who are a couple of the players that are younger players that maybe you're still kind of waiting here, sitting to see what was the motivation for them to be a pretty significant investment from a draft capital perspective?
Yeah, really good question. Paris Johnson Jr. is the left tackle for the future. So for those that forget, Kyle, the Cardinals had the 3rd overall pick 2 drafts ago, traded back to number 12 with Houston, then traded back up to number 6 and drafted Paris Johnson Jr. while getting a future first-round pick that turned into Darius Robinson, while getting a future pick in 2024 as well in the mid-rounds. Paris Johnson Jr. is the left tackle for the future, set and forget. And that's a massive thing that the Cardinals have to protect Kyler Murray's blind side. I mentioned Max Melton and Garrett Williams. Garrett Williams from 2 years ago, 3rd-round pick out of Syracuse, who, if he didn't tear his ACL around Christmas time, he would have been a fringe first-round pick. So that was a very Monty Ossenfort thing to do right out the gate. Max Melton, the Cardinals traded back in the 2nd round last year. They needed a corner, and between where they were supposed to draft and where they traded back to, Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Kamari Lassiter all went. 3 of the top buzzword corners, and the Cardinals had Rutgers Max Melton on their radar. One super deep cut that is going to be a great safety in the league is Dadrian Taylor-Demerson out of Texas Tech. Like, the face that you make, I know that you're a draft dude. Like, aptly named. Work for the Draft Network. Like, this is what you do. Every single person, every single radio show I've gone on since they drafted him, every single person, when I brought that name up, would say, yep, he was on our board for the team in the city in which I was on the radio. So naturally, with that smile, then you see with some upside in him too.
Yeah, he's was dynamic, had good ball skills, was a physical player, and the devaluation in the safety position in general. And I think it was an interesting but like mildly deep class last year. You've seen a couple of not first round and not top 50 guys that got drafted at safety. So I'm not surprised at all to hear that he's a player that pops a little bit. Are there any other injuries coming into this game other than the ones that we've kind of gone over? Any names to watch throughout the injury report that goes on this week for Arizona?
So one name to answer your question fully before, Trey Benson's had a really slow start, running back out of Florida State, who was pinned as a top 3 back, and he's really struggled during the beginning of the season. He's one of them on the injury report. He was questionable going into Monday night. He was elevated, but Amari DeMarcado, 2nd-year player at TCU, got the reps. The Cardinals are pretty clean. The players who are hurt, they've lost for the year on IR. Jonah Williams, right guard, right tackle, Will Hernandez, right guard. It's pretty clean, pretty straightforward. Marvin Harrison Jr. now 2 weeks out of concussion protocol, even though he took a nasty hit that resulted in a personal foul to the dome this past Monday. He should be good to go on Sunday as well.
Well, we're going to get into the Dolphins side of this matchup up here next on this crossover Thursday with Alex and I, Locked On Cardinals, Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. Pre-alcohol probiotic drink by ZBiotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to take ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll be your best by tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On NFL at checkout. ZBiotics is backed by a 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. So I guess coming out of the break here, Alex, what do you want to know about the Dolphins? I feel like you're getting off the hot seat. It's going to be hot down there in South Florida, but you're not. That shouldn't faze anybody in Arizona. It's a different kind of heat, but Put me on the hot seat here, and let's talk about this Dolphins football team.
Yeah, so I want to hold off on Tua for just a second because the roster construction has been fascinating for me from afar. So Christian Wilkins, probably the biggest name in free agency this offseason, a guy who is known maybe more for his mic'd up moments than actually how much of a terror he is in the interior of the defensive line to a common fan. What are the immediate impacts of losing a guy like that on the defensive side of the ball, which has been formidable at times over the last couple seasons?
Yeah, and I would say from a yardage perspective, the Dolphins have been a pretty tough team to go against. They've only conceded 300 yards of offense in one of their games thus far this season. Now, some of that's because the defense is starting on the minus side, on their own side of the 50-yard line. The last 3 touchdowns the Dolphins have given up, and have been on their own. The drive has started on their own side of the 50-yard line. So some tough situations that they have been put in by this non-complimentary game script that they've been forced to play without Tua. But to answer your question about losing Christian Wilkins, it's been softened greatly by the fact that Calais Campbell's probably been their best player. And that's, to some degree, a strike against like Jalen Ramsey and how teams have been able to navigate around Jalen Ramsey as an elite football player on that side of the ball. And Javon Holland hasn't really lived up to what people hoped that he could be this season. And he missed this past game with a broken hand. But part of it's also like, holy cow, Calais Campbell could still go at 38 years old. Like it's incredible to watch him. And I could see the Cardinals fans familiar with Calais Campbell, right? So probably not that big of a surprise to some people listening, but he has taken the majority of those snaps opposite Zach Sealer, and he has been a menace. Now, the trade-off is Christian Wilkins played like 90% of your snaps, and 38-year-old Calais Campbell does not play 90% of your snaps. So it's when Calais is not on the field and you have to platoon that you really feel the absence, whether it's Deshaun Hand, who's the next primary guy, or whether it's Benito Jones, who's a little bit more of a true, authentic nose tackle who played with Detroit last year. Those guys, they have very skill and role-specific qualities that they can bring, but Calais can do it all, and he can line up on the nose and pass rush situations. You can line him at base end. You can put him at 3 technique, like you can move him all around. And he has, for the contract that they signed him to, he might be the best value on the roster because he's been the best player on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I was hoping that you weren't going to bring that up until the last minute or two of this segment. Leading it off, that's my fault. I shouldn't have led with Christian Wilkins. Calais Campbell was let go by Steve Keim and Michael Bidwell when he was 31 or 32 because they didn't want to give him $30 million. He goes to Saxonville. He spearheads Saxonville. Yeah. He goes to Baltimore. He goes to Atlanta where he's beloved. And he's 38 years old, still doing his thing. And we don't need to go into this because we could do this for 45 minutes. We don't even need to ask what he's done for that locker room to stabilize the locker room with all the things that are going on. He's one of the best interviews I've ever had. Total sweetheart. Like it's a Travis mockery that the Cardinals let him go. Oh, and for the old heads, the old Bud Light Travis mockery commercial. Go look and see who that actor was that said that. It's going to blow your mind. It's a huge television star right now. Anyways, squirrel. Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah.
150 concussions. All joking aside, it's something that scary, naturally. You talk about this a lot, I'm sure. It's something the Cardinals have luckily not had to deal with Kyler Murray specifically. How do you handle somebody with kid gloves in the NFL and make the right decision?
You don't. I mean, it became as simple as he had a concussion. He was reportedly symptom-free the following day. Doesn't matter. You're going on IR. That's the recommendations of the doctor based off the concussion that you had, regardless of the symptoms, based off the reaction to that impact at that point in time. The medical professional advice was he needs at least 30 days. And that's where we're at. Now, from this point on, Tua has to do the responsible thing. And I have on my show been pretty curt with Tua himself and his decision-making, putting him in that position to take that hit against Buffalo unnecessarily. Right? As a player who just got a big investment and was supposed to be a big vote of confidence after you stayed healthy all year last year, to put yourself in a position to take that contact. And he said so on the podium. And I thought more importantly, Mike McDaniel's been very, he doesn't like to put players on blast in the media, and he didn't really put Tua on blast, but he effectively did say there is a weight of responsibility that falls on the player to protect himself. And Tua did not in that moment. So if Tua's going to continue to play and play like he's capable of and be the player that the Dolphins want him to be and that he's capable of being, he has to play differently. And he's always learned every lesson the hard way, from a play style perspective and from an injury perspective. Almost every injury he's taken going back to his last year at Alabama was like an avoidable play on an extended play. Is this the wake-up call? If it's not the wake-up call, then I think you do get to the point where, like, the Dolphins, they can't treat him like with kid gloves. But the Dolphins, when they did the contract extension this offseason, they did put a date for his 2026 salary guarantee. It's a deadline by the middle of March next year. And, like, if they have more problems with this, like, they have a decision to make too. And that was what I said when the injury first happened, and you're talking about Tua and him having to make a decision based off doctor feedback, whether he wants to play or not. He was very defiant at the beginning of this week that, like, this is what I love to do. This is what I'm going to do. But if you don't play a certain way, then the decision becomes the Dolphins' decision. And the way that they wrote the contract, they do have the ability to make a decision and minimize the sunk cost because they would only be on the hook for his 2025 salary is guaranteed. So if it's a matter of, look, we can't help you, we got to help ourselves. If he puts you in that position, they can do that. You hope that's not the case.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we'll talk about the wide receivers and everything. Everybody knows Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Johnny Smith has done a good job there. Like, there's one thing. Let me ask you one quick follow-up here about Tua. Is this more about him being stubborn? May be the wrong word, but more like in the moment, I don't care, I'm going to get the yardage. Is it more that, or that the offensive line isn't necessarily doing its job to keep him safe in the pocket where he thrives on, on a timed offense, which is what, has made all of this work so well?
So the entire offensive scheme is never going to be predicated on authentic drop back passing, but the offensive line has been better than I think what a lot of casual Dolphins fans themselves, like, I get pushback on my show, and I'm like, on the list of problems that the Dolphins have right now, they've had continuity this year on the offensive line. Teron Armstead missed one game in concussion protocol. The left guard, Robert Jones, missed about a half of football a little earlier in the season. But this was a team last year. Your starting right tackle played 16 games. Your next starter at the beginning of the year played less than 550 snaps on the season. Your starting center played less than 500 snaps on. Like, they didn't have anybody play. They had primary backups taking majority of snaps at 4 out of 5 spots last year. So the talent drop off from Robert Hunt, who left in free agency and signed a $100 million contract with the Panthers, to Liam Eichenberg, they got worse. But at least at this point, it's the same guys playing next to each other. And without Tua, I think you have seen better performance and growth. Like, it's facilitated growth in the other ways because they've had to try to play that way. But the play he got hurt on was they dropped back. It was 4th down. His back foot hits the ground. You get a little bit of a push off the right-hand side, so you got to step up in the pocket. And he had all the space in the world off to his left to be able to go to. So they were very selective in week 1 against Jacksonville with how they chose to call offensively the game. Get the ball out of his hands quick. I would not be surprised if they see some continuation of that early against Arizona until they get a feel for how the pass rush is going to play. But the offensive line, it's not great. It's not good. Philosophically, you could approach it very differently and give yourself a bigger menu than what the Dolphins do. But I don't think it's like this root cause of, like, hey, they've got this massive Achilles heel that it's a risk to put him out there.
And that's a win. In the NFL, that's a win.
Yeah.
Now, one last thing before we pivot to the path to victory here. Kyle Krabs, Alex Clancy, crossover Thursday. Mike McDaniel is a weirdo. Okay. And I say that with the utmost of respect and seriousness. Like, he is not just a cardboard cutout that's a human being that's a football coach. Jonathan Gannon shows personality also, and they've both not necessarily been mocked for it, but it's like, I don't understand the vitriol behind, heaven forbid this person smiles during a press conference or is laughing on the sidelines after a big play. Like, talk to me, give me like a minute about what Mike McDaniel's aura has done for that team, even with all this adversity, with him kissing Tua on the forehead, saying, go get better. We'll get you, we'll get you when you're ready.
Yeah, I would say being a non-traditional head coach can be fun until you're not winning football games.
Okay.
And that's kind of the appetite around Mike McDaniel right now, because a lot of the issues he had in his first year in 2022, they're still present in 2024 as far as play calls getting in late. So now you're taking delays of game, or you're having to burn timeouts, or the attention to detail, or the pre-snap functional stuff, because there's so much shift motion. And they did that when they had their backup quarterbacks, and the game against Seattle was just an abject disaster. They couldn't get lined up right. That kind of stuff was like the stuff that plagued you when you had Skylar Thompson playing as a 7th-round rookie in Buffalo in the wild card game in 2022. And it's the same thing. So for a lot of Dolphins fans, like, you appreciate the individuality, but there's a lot of cracks that have been put under the microscope because you haven't had the margin that your starting quarterback gives you to win football games. And I think that's working against Mike McDaniel right now. And you want to see them address some of that and make some of the changes they made with the backup quarterbacks, keep some of that more simplified now that you're getting to a back, because I think it would benefit the entire offense.
Absolutely. Kyle Krabs, Locked on Dolphins, Alex Clancy, Locked on Cardinals crossover Thursday, pass to victory next.
NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Right now, Cardinals at Dolphins is on the board at Miami, -3. I was kind of keeping an eye on this in the build-up to this week, and they left it off the board. And then the news that Tua is coming back to practice, this game goes up on the board at Miami -3 as the home team. Obviously, depending on what happens with the Tua Tagovailoa situation, I'd be interested if he's clears concussion protocol and that's announced. Does it creep up a little bit? I'd be curious if it's announced that he's out. Does it creep down a little bit? It sounds like there's no other really severe injuries on either side here from an injury report perspective that could potentially shift this either more, but it's something to watch. So if you like that plus or -3 right now, you can get it over there, and you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. So let's get into keys to victory, Alex. I want to do 3 apiece, and I'd be a horrible host if I didn't let you go first. So what are the keys to victory for the Cardinals against the Dolphins?
Number one, first and foremost, the offense needs to hum. This is a Kyler Murray needs to be special moment. I've gotten a lot of crap for saying that all Kyler Murray needs to do this year is be an elevated game manager who makes special plays when necessary. And that's what he did against the Chargers. 45-yard touchdown run. He let him down on the game-winning drive to win the game at the end of the game. He needs to be better. He needs to be better. He needs to be more effective, and he needs to get Marvin Harrison Jr. involved. That's not a key to victory for me, getting Marvin Harrison Jr. involved. This offense would be fine without Marvin Harrison Jr. The fact that they have him is a bonus. And I think that that's something that just needs to be mentioned because, that's where we're at, and it's going to take him a little time to get acclimated. But Kyler Murray starts and ends with him. Number 2, it's a 1A really, is they have to have some sort of semblance of pass rush. Now, whether this is Max Melton off the edge, whether this is Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson with safety blitz packages, the Cardinals need to get into Tua's kitchen. It doesn't need to be with sack totals. It's got to be pressures. It's got to get him off schedule, because if he doesn't get off schedule, Tyreek Hill is going to remind everybody why he's probably the best receiver on the planet. And then if you're not reminded by that, Jalen Waddle is going to remind you why he's one of the fastest wide receivers in the game, great hands, and can break up a 75-yarder at any moment. And then the third one with that is they cannot give up the big play. Let Devon Achane, let Raheem Mostert get their 4 or 5 yards a carry at most, but keep everything in front of you. The Cardinals defense is not equipped to give up chunk plays for touchdowns that puts the offense on their heels, 3 and out, defense back on the field. That is a nightmare scenario for the Cardinals. So those 3, Kyler Murray needs to be elite. The pass rush needs to get home at least once or twice to rattle Tua a little bit. And then you can't give up the big play to Tyreek and Jalen Waddle specifically.
Yeah. For me in Miami, it's as simple as, number 1, Tua Tagovailoa has to play. If Tua doesn't play, I mean, they just picked CJ Beathard up as another because Tyler Huntley, who's started the last 3 games, he's now hurt. And Skylar Thompson started against Seattle, and he got hurt in the second half of that game. So you just kind of have this merry-go-round that's exhausting. The Dolphins did this when these two teams, or when they had to play without Tua in 2022 as well, where like you would a stretch of like 4 straight times where the same quarterback that started the game did not finish the game. So if you can get Tua Tagovailoa back, get him out of concussion protocol, it gives you a functional passing offense, which they have not had, and it's been frankly inexcusable to still have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and the ability to run the football. I know Jonnu Smith the past 2 weeks has really emerged. To have all of that happening and to average like 145 passing yards a game is just awful. And that's where they've been. So Tua has played 7 quarters, less than 7 quarters, and he still has more than 100 passing yards than any of the other quarterbacks that have played. And there's been 3 of them thus far this season. And it's week 8. So Tua has to play. That's the first thing. I think the next thing for me, aside of finishing with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill not finishing for combined 3 touches, which is what they did against the Colts, but that goes into Tua playing. I'd love to see more of Jalen Wright, the 4th-round rookie running back who did a really nice job against the Colts or against the Patriots, and then came out after the bye, coming out of the bye with Devon Achane back. And Jalen Wright got 6 snaps, not 6 touches, 6 snaps. And Wright has the explosiveness of Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane, but he's a bigger player. And like when Miami has had success, especially against the Colts, they were getting dirty yards. They were running between the tackles a little bit more as compared to being the finesse outside zone, get out on the edge. They've really struggled with their wide receivers blocking out on the perimeter to get them the edge in those plays. So I would love to see a more physical runner take some of that workload so that you can turn as the game goes on. 4-yard gains can become 7-yard gains. And Jalen Wright's been really close to popping a couple runs for explosive runs too. So that's one big thing for me. And then on defense, I would say, especially with Kyler and the athleticism that he has, the Dolphins have had a lot of really impactful and effective fire zone blitzes and DBs coming out of the nickel, kind of getting free runs at the quarterback. That's been more over the last 2 weeks, Jalen Ramsey. I would love to see Ramsey have a prominent role in that regard in this game as well. I think he had 5 pass rush reps in this past game, and he had pressures on like 3 of them. Jeez. So it's like that's been something that's worked for them, and the Dolphins' edge group is really banged up. Doesn't sound like Bradley Chubb's coming back off of PUP for this game and having his practice window open. So they'll be without him for another week. They should have Emmanuel Ogbah back. But those DB fire zone pressures being something where you want to play zone and be able to have eyes on the quarterback anyway because he has the threat to run. So take advantage of that, try to manipulate the numbers and the protection to get a free runner and have it be an athletic player that can actually finish that rep with a chance to get Kyler on the ground.
I think that's fair. I mean, I think that's all. I'm terrified. I mean, the Cardinals have shown that they can win ugly because they've won ugly, which is something that teams that are growing can't usually do. It's usually you lose by a little. It's hard to win by a little. And I think that that's what the Cardinals have shown in their 2 wins, in their last 2 wins this year, that they can do. So going on the road, hopefully cramps aren't an issue with the Cardinals. I mean, is that something that's, as we get out of here, I mean, is that something that visiting teams deal with every week? I mean, I don't have the pulse on it.
Yeah. And any Western New York fans that are listening are going to throw rocks at me, but because they get so mad about this, the way that the stadium and the canopy is engineered, the last thing on the field to leave the sun is the visitor sideline. And they did that on purpose. And it's usually around 3:15, 3:30 that the shade finally gets over there. So you spend not only the field where you're playing in the humid heat, but then you come over to the sideline and you have to sit, unless you bring all that equipment over with the fans and the tents and all the stuff and put them over the benches, you sit in the sun too. And it is definitely something, it's been a big part of the reason why Miami has had the home field successes that they have had, particularly in the Mike McDaniel era, where they've been able to score points and kind of force you to strain late in games, and it has taken over. So it is definitely an X factor to watch for these two teams, but we'll have you covered. We got you covered the rest of the week. We have you covered in the post game. All your Cardinals needs, Locked On Cardinals. All your Dolphins needs, Locked On Dolphins. It's all of your teams every day. We don't just say it, We live it here on the Locked On Network. We hope you guys appreciated this crossover Thursday. For Alex, I'm Kyle. Enjoy the game. Here's to a healthy game on Sunday, and we will talk to you all again soon.